Well, the summer, our grass is growing, right? I mean, we just got back from heavy hitters not long ago. The grass was topping out. That's what happens in the summertime, right? So grass starts to really play more and more and more as the year goes on. What else is happening? The brimmer bed, right? So you got brim beds everywhere. Um, and last, you know, everyone wants a little bit of shade in the summer. We want it. The bass want it. So in the summertime, shade really starts to play. So these are the things I look for in the summer for my frog bite, right? Obviously, grass is the easy one, right, guys? I mean, we can go to a whole seminar on grass. There's very few grass that gets right in the summer, but when it happens, it happens. We've got a little bit of a shad spawn going on. So if you have bank grass in your area, always Alabama comes to mind, right? You got all that grass that you follow in different places. But I mean, anytime the shad are spawning on grass, a frog is a key component to my, what I have in my lineup. But emerging grass, especially in the South, is key, but it has to get right. And, one thing most people don't realize is that when hydrilla, I'd say most people, when hydrilla first comes up and it first surfaces, man, it is so thick. It just doesn't work, right? So you got to wait for that grass to get right. And so most of the time, hydrilla is way too thick in the summer. I would say 99.9% of the time. There are some exceptions, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But for the most part, most emerging grass in the summer, especially hydrilla and milfoil, is probably going to be too thick to really throw your frog yet. You got to wait for the fall for that. We'll go over that. But what you are looking for is, you got brim beds is probably one of my key things in the summer I look for with a frog. And so anywhere you have brim beds, a frog is going to play, especially shallow brim beds. We've gotten to the point now with forward-facing sonar and all those other things that we're finding a lot of brim beds that are offshore. They spawn deeper than we ever thought. But man, do not let that take you away. I mean, I promise you, throwing a Cinco on a 6-foot brim bed is not near as much fun as throwing a frog on a 2-foot brim bed. Okay, and that's the key with brim beds is if you're throwing a frog on a brim bed, it has to be shallow. You're probably not going to get a bite on a 6-foot brim bed with a frog. A frog is designed in a lot of ways to intimidate, to trigger a bite. And so in most cases, spawning fish, brim bed fish, those kind of things, those fish have to be fairly close to the surface. Now, there are times that they're up in the water column, but for the most part, you're going to want to be in 3 or 4 foot or less to really get a consistent bite on the frog. So summertime brim beds, I look for shallow brim beds. And man, the more I fish, the more I find those brim beds on the main channel. And I don't know what it is about that. I used to be a creek guy and going back and finding those fish in creeks and stuff. But the more I fish and the more I target those brim beds in the summer, the more I look on the main body of water. And I think it just has to do with there's bigger groups of fish out there. There's more of them cruising the bank. Man, when you get in a creek, they just seem, the population, I think, gets down a little bit, and there's just not as many. So on your body of water, whether it's, Gunnersville or wherever, I had a tournament not long ago in Gunnersville. I'd never targeted a piece of grass. I caught them all on brim beds in the summer, in June, on brim beds. And threw a frog and never caught one near a blade of grass. And you're at Gunnersville, Alabama, you think, I got to be fishing grass. Well, you don't. And so shallow brim beds are amazing. So we got brim beds, and then last we got undercuts and overhangs, man. In the summer, they're looking for shade.